What if every apology you make is training people to dominate you? There's a precise moment when you stop being perceived as a leader and start being seen as someone who can be pushed around. And that moment often begins with the phrase that seems harmless on the surface: "I'm sorry." Watch what happens in any room when someone apologizes unnecessarily. It's not compassion that flashes across people's faces. It's something more primal, more instinctive. It's the immediate recognition of hierarchy being established. Throughout history, the most effective military commanders understood something brutal about human psychology: whoever justifies themselves first loses the psychological terrain. I'm not talking about being callous or lacking empathy. I'm talking about something far more sophisticated that separates those who control the narrative from those who are controlled by it. During the Cold War, intelligence operatives mastered what became known as Cold Force, the ability to maintain low emotional temperature while keeping high strategic pressure. Here's what that means in practical terms: you don't explode, you don't over-explain, you don't beg for validation. You simply hold your position with an unshakable calm that destabilizes the other person. Because high performance isn't about aggression. It's about being unmovable. It's about creating a gravitational field around yourself where people naturally align with your frequency rather than you constantly adjusting to theirs. Think about the master negotiators who shaped the outcomes of international conflicts. They didn't walk into conference rooms apologizing for their demands or softening their positions. They created strategic silences, used calculated pauses, and maintained neutral expressions that made it impossible to predict their next move. That's the essence of Cold Force. It's not emotional coldness. It's emotional control. It's mental discipline in its most refined form. Now, here's what nobody tells you: every time you apologize without genuine cause, you're training the people around you to expect submission from you. You're creating a behavioral pattern where you're always the first to yield, the first to back down, the first to doubt yourself. And high performance demands exactly the opposite. It demands that you be the anchor in turbulent waters, not another wave being tossed by the current. The ancient art of strategic communication teaches us that the person who maintains composure controls the temperature of any interaction. When you constantly apologize, you're heating up the room with your own anxiety, your own need for approval, your own uncertainty about your right to occupy space. And that heat, it evaporates your authority faster than anything else you could do. Anchor. Are you being the anchor or the wave in your interactions? Hit that like button if you're starting to see the power dynamics in every conversation. Why the most powerful people master the art of strategic silence. Let me tell you about a technique that the most formidable business leaders of the last century mastered with deadly precision. They would enter boardrooms where millions of dollars hung in the balance, where careers would be made or destroyed. And they would do something that seems simple, but is devastatingly effective. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They would simply wait. Strategic silence is one of the most powerful tools of Cold Force because it exposes an uncomfortable truth about human nature. We're terrified of emptiness. When silence emerges in a tense conversation, our primitive brain interprets it as social threat. And what do? We start filling that void with explanations, justifications, and yes, unnecessary apologies. It's precisely at that moment that we surrender control of the negotiation. The great chess masters of modern history understood that whoever moves first in a standoff usually loses. Not because the move itself is problematic, but because it reveals anxiety, reveals need, reveals that you're more uncomfortable with the silence than the other person. And that's valuable intelligence for whoever's on the other side. It's like playing poker while showing your cards. Here's what happens at the psychological level. When you resist the impulse to apologize or justify yourself, when you simply maintain eye contact and wait, you transfer all the discomfort onto the other person. You force them to react first, to reveal their intentions first, to show their hand first. This isn't cruel manipulation. It's high-performance strategy applied to human communication. Consider the military tacticians who changed the course of wars not through violence, but through the way they conducted briefings with their generals. They didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't apologize for difficult decisions. They presented the situation, each person in the eye, and waited. That pause, that silence loaded with authority, communicated more than 1,000 words could. It communicated certainty, communicated control, communicated that there was no room for unproductive questioning. The discipline here is resisting your own discomfort. Because it will be uncomfortable initially, your brain will scream at you to fill the silence, to soften the tension, to apologize for creating this awkward moment. But it's exactly that discomfort you need to push through to reach the next level of personal influence. It's the price of leadership mentality. Silence. Can you sit in silence when everyone expects you to justify yourself? Subscribe to this channel if you want to discover more high-performance secrets that nobody teaches. How? True confidence means never accepting blame that isn't yours. Here's where things get really interesting. There's a massive confusion between humility and submission, and this confusion is costing high-potential people dearly. Humility isn't making yourself small. It isn't accepting unfair criticism. It isn't apologizing for existing in the same space as other people. Real humility is recognizing your limits while maintaining total clarity about your value. The ancient Stoic philosophers had a fascinating concept about this. They believed you should be like a rock in the middle of the ocean. Waves crash against you, but you remain unmoved. Not because you're insensitive, but because you deeply understand what you can and cannot control. And guess what? You cannot control other people's emotions. So why apologize for them? Let me give you a practical example that completely shifts the power dynamic. Imagine someone is upset with you about a decision you made consciously, a decision that was necessary, correct, and aligned with your values. The person expects you to apologize. What do? If you understand cold force, you validate the emotion without accepting the blame. You say something like, "I understand this affected you, and this decision was made for specific reasons that I stand by." See the difference? You didn't apologize. You didn't retreat. But you also weren't insensitive or arrogant. You simply held your ground while acknowledging the other person's emotional reality. This is the delicate dance between empathy and strength. It's possible to be firm without being cold, to be clear without being cruel. But this requires brutal self-awareness and mental discipline that few are willing to develop. The great entrepreneurs who built empires didn't get there by apologizing for their bold visions. They faced skepticism, devastating criticism, and public rejection. But they held the course, not out of stubbornness, but because they had developed such solid internal clarity that external opinions could no longer shake them. That's high-performance mentality in action. Here's the truth that hurts. If you're constantly apologizing, you're signaling that you don't trust your own decisions. And if you don't trust yourself, why should anyone else trust you? Leadership, whether of teams or of your own life, requires the courage to make unpopular decisions and the resilience not to apologize for them when you know they're right. Boundaries. How many times did you apologize this week for things you didn't do wrong? Drop it in the comments and hit that like button. If you're recognizing patterns you need to break, what if stopping unnecessary apologies was your greatest act of respect? I'm going to show you a perspective that will flip your understanding upside down. What if every time you apologize unnecessarily, you're actually disrespecting the other person? Sounds counterintuitive, but think with me. When you apologize for things you didn't do, for decisions that were necessary, or simply for taking up space, you're treating the other person as incapable of handling reality. You're essentially saying, "You're so fragile that I need to make myself smaller so you feel comfortable." That's not kindness. It's condescension disguised as humility. The strongest people around you don't want your false apologies. They want your authenticity, your firmness, your genuine respect for their capacity to process complex situations without you protecting them from reality. In Zen monasteries, masters had a radical approach to teaching mental discipline. When a student would apologize for a mistake, often, the master would simply remain silent or say something seemingly harsh. Why? Because they understood that empty apologies are just emotional noise. What matters is behavioral change, real learning, internal transformation. Apologizing without that transformation is just social theater. Here's the high-performance exercise that will change your life. For the next 7 days, Observe how many times you have the impulse to apologize. Before you speak those words, ask yourself, did I actually do something wrong? Or am I just trying to manage someone else's emotions? If it's the latter, breathe, hold your posture, and simply continue the conversation without apologizing. Watch how the dynamics shift. You'll discover something surprising. People respect clarity more than submission. They might not initially like your new stance, but they'll start treating you differently. They'll stop constantly testing your boundaries because you've made clear where your lines are. And that, my friend, is the beginning of true leadership. Not the leadership of titles and positions, but the leadership of presence and resilience. The great military strategists of history knew that the best defense isn't a high wall, but well-defined territory. When you stop apologizing for existing in your own space, you're defending your psychological territory. You're telling the world, I have the right to be here, to make my decisions, and to maintain my convictions. And that silent message is more powerful than any motivational speech. Respect. Are you ready to defend your psychological space? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now, because we're just beginning to unearth the secrets of true high performance. Disclaimer: this content is for educational and informational purposes regarding communication strategies and personal development. The techniques presented should be applied with ethical discernment and respect for individual situations. In contexts where you genuinely made a mistake or caused real harm, offering sincere apologies is appropriate and necessary. This video does not replace professional advice in psychology, coaching, or other specialized areas.